Misinformation, false information, rumour spread really quickly.
Reporting from conflict zones during that period will have exposed you to the sort of challenge of verifying information in chaos, essentially.
Fairly rapidly, I was kind of face down on the ground with a gun pointed to my head.
I'm curious about what you feel about the word story.
Professionally, I spent most of my life as a foreign correspondent working for the BBC. We were getting close to a point where way too many people just didn't believe anything anymore. They didn't believe anything they would read or see or hear anywhere.
Sort of brings us on to AI. I have found myself more and more going like, whoa, this gets indistinguishable very, very soon, if not already. Spinning out quick AI video still feels like most of the time you can tell.
If you talk politics, there's always been political spin, right? And so there should be. We need to have these debates about the important political issues of the day, and we need to disagree about them. But we also need a body of shared facts so the debate actually makes some sense.
It's quite a leap. You've gone from sort of broadcasting to governance and organisational structure.
I often say about foreign correspondents is they wouldn't know how to run a bath.
Chris, thank you so much for doing an episode of Causes. How are you sort of showing up? How's your day going?
Busy. Yeah, we've got our annual report's about to come out. There's plenty of kind of bad, false, misleading information out there keeping us busy, and it's just quite a strange time in the world. So yeah, no, it's busy, busy, busy. All systems go.
Yeah. So yeah, as we mentioned sort of before the show started, there's a lot of there'll be international development, sort of humanitarian leaders who are part of this podcast. A lot of people who are listening are in that world as well. You were the BBC Sri Lanka correspondent from 1990 to 1992, which was during the Sri Lankan Civil War, and there was sort of a lot of political events happened during that time. I guess the question I've got for you to kick things off is, reporting from conflict zones during that period will have exposed you to the sort of challenge of verifying information in chaos, essentially. What are the takeaways that stick with you from that time that you still think about?
I mean, it's really interesting you say that, because obviously it feels like a long time ago. At 1990, a different world. I didn't have a mobile phone. When I went, the first few times I went up to northern Sri Lanka after the civil war resumed, all the landlines were down. So there's literally no way to communicate with the outside world. And yet, even in those circumstances, you could see how what you might call misinformation, false information, rumour spread really quickly. I mean, one of the more alarming incidents I had to deal with was when we got to an isolated police post, and this policeman had somehow heard a rumour that there may be Israeli agents on the ground helping the Tamil Tiger rebels. And I rocked up with two Indian journalists as the white guy who looked like he could be an Israeli. And fairly rapidly, I was kind of face down on the ground with a gun pointed to my head. And I thought, this is so weird. We're in the middle of nowhere, and yet this guy's got this bad information from somewhere. The way rumour spreads when people are scared. And he was probably as scared as I was. And eventually we sort of talked him down, but it always stayed with me, especially as, technology has advanced so rapidly and anyone can spread information just at the click of a button. How even then it was something which could have a real impact and a harmful impact on people's lives.
Yeah. So let's get into this sort of intersection. Your background, what do we need to know about your sort of upbringing, your personal life and your work life to figure out sort of how you've ended up at this intersection of journalism and fact checking?
So, I mean, professionally, I spent most of my life as a foreign correspondent working for the BBC. As you said, I was based in Sri Lanka, in India, in Turkey, in Belgium, sort of covering the EU and Europe more widely, and also in the US as covering the US State Department. So I spent a lot of my time traveling around the world. Some of it was at kind of like, international summits and political gatherings. Others was in either conflict zones or disaster zones. So it's a real sort of mix of things. But one thing which stays with you, whatever kind of story you are telling, and we'll come back to the word story because it's really important, that accuracy is really important. And then when I came back from being on the road for a long time, the BBC asked me to basically help set up BBC Reality Check, essentially the BBC version of fact checking, and actually get the idea of fact checking onto the airwaves, on radio, on TV. And I sort of did that in the immediate period to begin with, following the Brexit referendum result, which, as you'll remember, was a pretty kind of, fractious time in British politics, lots of tempers flaring, lots of anger. And then rapidly followed by the pandemic, when we switched to health misinformation and looking at things like vaccine hesitancy and so forth. And it just occurred to me, the culmination of all of that and the extraordinary pace of changes in technology meant we were getting close to a point where way too many people just didn't believe anything anymore. They didn't believe anything they would read or see or hear anywhere. And I thought, if we actually get to that point where that is the case, that most people don't feel they can trust anything, that's really dangerous. It's dangerous for democracy, because if no one trusts you, they don't really have any consent. It's dangerous for businesses if nobody trusts their brand, because there's so much misinformation about the brand. And I just think it's dangerous for us as a society if we don't feel we can believe anything that anyone else is telling us. So I just think the importance of trust and having the confidence believe that to believe there is still information that you are able to verify to your own satisfaction, so you can then make the choice, have an opinion, make the choice that matters to you and your family and friends. That's really important. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am today. And it often feels like the bad guys are winning, but it doesn't mean we should stop trying.
So, I mean, this would have come up later, but I sort of want to talk to you about it now. One is, there's a couple of questions. One is the word story. So you talked about that, and I'm curious about what you feel about the word story and what story is. But also in that time, you sort of you were setting up the sort of BBC fact checking stuff. Was when you heard that was a thing that was sort of on the table, did that come to you, or were you sort of fighting for it? Were you incredibly excited about sort of setting this up, or was it like, okay, I will?
Okay, two things. So stories first. A lot of the way fact checking developed was quite often looking at very specific points of data, like, this says it's 4.5%, it was actually 4.1, or this said it happened in 1974, it actually happened in 1973. Fine, that's important, but specific points of data on their own are not enough, because the way people learn, the way we consume information is through stories. And that's why someone like Donald Trump, no matter what you think of him, whether you love him or you hate him, he has the ability to connect with the people who do support him by telling stories. And so one of the things I'm trying to do here at Full Fact, and I think was important at the BBC as well, is not just fact checking specific points of data, but trying to add context to the narratives that shape our lives. Because sometimes it's the narrative which is misleading. And you've got to be really careful not to start then fact checking people's opinions. So it's about adding context. It's about adding nuance to the kind of narrative that people put forward. I mean, if you talk politics, there's always been political spin, right? And so there should be. Politicians should be able to try and persuade you and me and everyone else to agree with the opinion they're trying to put forward. Our position is pretty simple, though. That's fine. We need to have these debates about the important political issues of the day, and we need to disagree about them. But we also need a body of shared facts so the debate actually makes some sense. But that's why I think stories are important. The second point, was it something I was kind of pushed into? I mean, it was partly because I think at the time I came back from abroad and Britain had just voted to leave the European Union, clearly didn't quite know how to do that. And not a lot of people actually understood much about the EU. When I covered the EU, my position was kind of, I don't really care whether you love it or hate it, but you should take it seriously, because at that point, before we left, it was a function of UK government. You might love that, you might hate it, but you should take it seriously. And so it was partly I was given that job and I was happy to do it because I'd spent the last 5 years in Brussels, and it was about explaining to people in the UK who'd never really paid that much attention to the EU, let's face it, or if they had, it had been sort of covered as a pantomime of bendy bananas or, condoms of the wrong size and all sorts of strange stories which appeared on the front pages of our newspapers. And it was about just trying to explain what this thing was, how it worked, and the issues we'd have to confront as we tried to work out how to leave it.
This all sort of leads to Full Fact. For people who don't know, because I have done some reading, but I didn't know about Full Fact until pretty recently. So can you talk to me about like what Full Fact is, what it's here to do, how you've ended up here?
Sure. Am I allowed to swear on your show?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. So the Full Fact was set up in late 2009, 2010 to answer the question which was posed by the then main presenter of Newsnight, who many people remember, Jeremy Paxman, and his question that he used quite a lot when he talked about how his interviewing style came to be was, why is this bastard lying to me? And that was the driving force behind setting up Full Fact. It was about trying to hold politicians in particular to higher standards of accuracy. And if they said things which simply weren't true and you could verifiably show that the facts were wrong, that they should be held to account for that. What's happened subsequently, of course, between being set up in 2010 with a real focus on politics and trying to essentially raise standards in public life at Westminster, is the internet, technology, social media. The canvas on which we paint now is so much broader than that narrow focus on politics. Because if you talk about false or misleading information, misinformation, whatever you want to call it, it just infects everyone's everyday life every time we pick up the mobile phone, which is on the table, or take it out of our pocket. So, we have a politics team still, but we also have a team which looks specifically at health misinformation, which can be pretty harmful if people follow some of the advice that's out there on the internet. And then we have a third team that really looks kind of more generally just at weird stuff on the internet. It may be photographs which claim to be something they're not, or bits of video which have been taken from over here, and someone says, "Oh, this shows this is happening right now," and actually the videos from 4 years ago, or just sort of strange, I guess you'd say, conspiracy theories which are spreading and which people do believe, and then they sometimes share without understanding what it is they're sharing. So it's the work that Full Fact does. It has just become a lot broader because of the sort of tsunami of either false, misleading, or artificially generated junk which swirls around us every day.
Yeah, which we'll get onto the AI stuff, because I can't imagine how difficult this is making your and your team's life. But on Full Fact, though, so you'll debunk stuff and you'll fact check these things, but then what are you actually like? How are you sort of getting that correction into the sort of consciousness?
So that's one of the important things I think Full Fact does in a way that, for example, the BBC doesn't. We don't just publish a fact check, but if it's, for example, a politician, maybe a cabinet minister, who said something that is inaccurate, we will then contact them, write to them, say, can you correct the record? So it's not just published, but it's published and then act. And one of the reasons for that, again, comes back to technology. The chat interfaces we're all going to be using, which are going to dominate our life, Chat GPT, Gemini, whatever, they scrape the internet to get information. And if you wanted a good faith attempt to say, well, where can we find accurate information about British politics, then Hansard, the written record of what's in Parliament, would probably be a pretty good place to start. But if people say stuff in Parliament which is wrong, either they know it's wrong or they made an honest mistake, doesn't really matter which. If it doesn't get corrected, then those large language models will scoop it all up and spit it out again at the other end. So, the bad information continues its journey and gets amplified. So we think it's really important to ask people to make corrections so it does stop the spread of bad information. But also when it comes to politicians, I don't think voters mind if people admit mistakes. And I think it's partly the fault of the media that some politicians find it so difficult, because every time you change your mind, the headline is, screeching U-turn. We all get things wrong, right? It's it's not whether we get things wrong, it's what we do about it once we realize it's wrong. And we strongly believe, for any politician, good luck to people who go into public life. It's difficult. You get a lot of stuff thrown at you, sometimes literally, but brickbats, insults, and all that sort of stuff. But if you are there, then with public office comes public responsibility, and you do need to take a lead on setting high standards. And it's as simple as that, really.
So what's the sort of pattern of responses you get from an MP's office, for example, when you ask for a correction?
I think it's fair to say it varies. Some do and have and do and will correct the record. Others are much more resistant or simply ignore us. But we've had, just in the last few weeks, a couple of cabinet ministers writing corrections saying, yep, I'm going to correct the record there. So, it does have an impact, and it does mean there's less incorrect information out there. Now, you can make an argument that this is one pinprick in this kind of vast morass of stuff, but one pinprick at a time, if you like. The other way, just to get back to the original question, the other way we actually make sure stuff, if you like, has impact is so we have a kind of financial relationship with Meta, which owns stuff like Facebook and Instagram. And they currently, we don't know how long this is going to go on for, but they currently pay us to do fact checking on their sites. So, for example, if we see something in a Facebook group that we think is incorrect, we will write a fact check. And then once we've submitted it to Meta, if somebody tries to share that information, they're not stopped from doing so, but a little label will pop up and say, this organization, you may not have heard of them, full fact, they think what you're about to share is actually wrong. Do you want to see what they've said before you share it? And then you have the option, you think, no, I don't care what they said, I'm going to share it anyway. Or you can read the label and think, okay, yeah, maybe they got a point there. I'm not going to share this. It's actually fake. And so the ability to actually sort of address information where it starts is really powerful. The uncertainty at the moment is that Meta has announced it's ending that fact-checking partnership program in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's part of the whole kind of change in tone and political pressure since the second Trump administration began. And it says it has an intention to end it in the rest of the world at some point in the future. And we don't know when that's going to be. But I think that would be a real shame, because I think, the social media platforms are some of the most powerful corporations the world has ever seen. They control vast amounts of our information environment. A lot of that is brilliant because we all have the access to incredible things at our fingertips. But I also think they have a responsibility to do more to make sure the fake, the false, the misleading, or the absolutely harmful stuff doesn't spread.
Yeah, I mean, that was a question I was going to come on to, because I saw there was sort of meta funding involved with Full Fact. How... I hear you when you say that, there's a lot of good that comes with these platforms and the scale and the reach and everything and the speed and all of that. But your Full Fact are here to sort of fight disinformation. It feels like you can pinpoint a few places, Meta being one of them, where it's the beehive of misinformation, disinformation. So how do you reconcile sort of taking on financial support from Meta when your whole mission is to sort of, for there to be a lack of misinformation?
I mean, because I think you've got to go get your hands dirty where the action is, basically. And, it's not they give us money as charitable donations. We provide a service, which is checking facts and making sure better information is out there in the places where many people go to get their information. We could make a choice to say we're not going to have anything to do with these people, but then we just sit back and watch that misinformation spread anyway. So it is a choice there. I mean, now I think there are some people who would criticize us for that, but we, as I'm saying to you, we in our policy positions, we are publicly very critical sometimes of the people we have a financial relationship with. But I think the editorial work we do is important enough for us to justify having that relationship, even though on the policy front, we are pretty insistent that they need to do more. And if they don't do more, then the government and regulators like Ofcom should enforce the need for them to do more by changing the law if necessary.
How can people develop regular people who are using the internet and using the apps and staying in touch with friends and family via them, how can they sort of develop critical thinking skills and adopt sort of responsible sharing habits, and sort of not accidentally spread misinformation?
So, I mean, one of the things we need to do is make sure, I mean, I don't like the term, but it's the term that gets used. Media literacy is spreads far and wide. People do have those critical thinking skills, the ability to have the confidence that they know how to navigate the internet. And that means it has to happen in schools. We're not trying to tell anyone what anyone want to think. We want to give them the ability to make choices for themselves. But not just in schools. I think, kind of lifelong learning. I mean, a lot of the people who fall for financial scams, for example, are quite often the older generation who find it more difficult to navigate their way around new technology. So as a society, I think we need to make sure people are equipped with the skills to navigate what is for many people a very confusing environment. And that is about persuading people sometimes to maybe think before they share, think before they forward something, look at an image and think, is that really going to be real?
Sort of brings us on to AI. I did a sort of experiment. I have a friend who's an AI developer, and we were looking at a version of image generation from a year ago. And so you could use this old model, and we typed in, it created this image, and then we did the same prompt now, and it's like billboard quality. It was a year ago pixelated. It was a bit rubbish. The hands didn't look very good. Now it's like, put that on a billboard in Times Square or whatever, and you wouldn't tell the difference. I have found myself, as somebody who's in comms and knows about images and things, like, I have found myself more and more going like, whoa, this gets indistinguishable very, very soon, if not already. What do we do in a world which is very quickly here? Arguably, it's here already in places where it's literally indistinguishable what you're seeing as a sort of video or as a photo that's been made and it's generated. Like, how that must make your mission feel unwinnable at some points, because it's moving so quickly and it's going to just take over everything. How are you facing this tidal wave?
It's a big challenge. Unfortunately, it's not just us. I mean, there's a lot of people thinking about this in kind of big media houses, in government and elsewhere. I mean, there are various schemes afoot, ways in which you can somehow, if you're talking about video, watermark something in a way which shows this is genuine or original video, or it can tell you where this video originated from. Or from the other end, it can say that this was artificially generated video. I mean, the problem is every time somebody comes up with a solution, it could be just a matter of changing a few pixels in the corner of an image. So there is a way to tell whether it has been artificially generated or whether it has actually been shot by a person with a camera. But as soon as the new methods come out, people find a way around them. And so there's if you like, there's a bit of an arms race going on. And it is really, really difficult. And you're right that even in the last year, as you suggested with your example, the technology has improved almost out of hand. I mean, only a few years ago, it would have taken an enormous amount of computing power and people sitting in a room with a big machine to create anything looking even vaguely like a convincing piece of video. As you know now, anyone with a phone and an app on it can do it in a matter of seconds. So again, we need to reinforce the idea of be skeptical about what you see. Last year we had a general election. There were a whole load of articles written about how generative AI was going to destroy democracy in this election, and it didn't happen. But the ability to produce political deepfakes at a scale which could, in theory, swing a close election is certainly something that anyone who is in a position of power needs to think about very carefully.
Yeah, and I guess with that, like the UK government can put in measures, and that's great. But actually, if you have sort of actors elsewhere who aren't sort of subscribing to this idea of watermarks or whatever, then it's all to play for other countries, for example, to throw this stuff into our algorithms.
Yeah, and obviously, information, whether good or bad, doesn't recognize borders, right? It just comes through the internet. It's there. It's on your phone. It doesn't matter where it's being created. So, but I suppose what I'm talking about, the government can deal with stuff which is made, for example, by UK political parties. So, sort of the things that are likely to be seen by a larger number of people. I mean, there were actually in the last election quite a few. I guess you'd call not even deep fake, more cheap fakes, because they weren't particularly sophisticated, but fakes of politicians. And we found them. But you thought, we're not even going to write about this because this one appears to have been viewed by 9 people. And as soon as you write about it or you report on it, you amplify it, which is obviously what the people who created it in the first place want to happen. The other thing, obviously, which is really tricky, reminded me from the last election, there were videos which quite a lot of people did see, were things like Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage playing Minecraft. You don't want to start fact checking satire. That's not a good place to be. It's not a good road to go down. But there is a kind of a bit of a grey area when you're thinking, okay, someone's created this thing. Is it satire or is it sabotage? A lot of it is clearly, if it's satire, it's a joke. You may think it's funny, you may not. We're not in the business of fact checking that and saying, well, you can't say that. And it's a joke, right? And sometimes jokes land well and sometimes they don't. But there's that grey area where it suddenly becomes something a little bit more sinister. And we know, and there's a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about this as well, that there are huge state-sponsored attempts to impact opinion in this country and other countries. It's interesting that the German election this year, for example, it was uncovered a huge information operation based out of Russia, which did produce a variety of fake videos of leading politicians. Would people believe them? Not necessarily, but it's a way to sow confusion, to sow uncertainty, and to undermine what is supposed to be, the fundamentals of a democratic process. So just because our last general election was not that badly affected, partly I think because it wasn't that close an election. If you the Conservatives pretty much conceded defeat on air a few weeks before we voted. If you're going to have a concerted attempt to sway an election, you're probably not going to choose one which doesn't feel close from the beginning. But it doesn't mean it can't happen in the future. And as you say, the technology from a year ago, just imagine what it's going to be like by 2029 when we're likely to have our next general election. So again, these are things people think about hard all the time, and there are no easy answers. And one of a phrase a friend of mine came up with, which I quite like to use. I think it kind of sums up, misinformation. It's not like plumbing. It's not a problem you fix by kind of moving a spanner and we fixed it. It's like crime. It's a social condition. You've got to continue to keep adjusting to it. It's a constant battle. And it's difficult, but I think it's better to try to do something than just sit back and let the sort of slop wash over us.
Yeah, amazing. One of the things I'm waiting for, and it might already exist, this might be a very dated sentence in the next sort of 2 weeks, is the weaknesses I feel like in terms of AI video is mouth movement. It's still not there as far as I can tell, unless you put in a lot of work. So spinning out quick AI video still feels like most of the time you can tell, but it's just we're on this ramp, aren't we? So it gets
I agree with you. At the moment, I would say we now think it's almost impossible to tell whether a piece of audio has been artificially generated. But video, there are telltale signs. The fingers look a bit weird. As you say, the movement of the mouth isn't quite right. Something's just slightly out of focus when you think it shouldn't be. So there are telltale signs, but boy, is the technology changing rapidly.
Let's move on just because I'm aware of time. So as I said, the sort of audience of this is charity sector people. You've gone from BBC to charity chief execing. It's quite a leap. You've gone from sort of broadcasting to governance and organisational structures.
I often say about foreign correspondents is they wouldn't know how to run a bath. You don't run anything. So actually coming from from being that very kind of you kind of you like operating on your own. You have a very small team, and that's but
Yeah.
there's internal and external competition, and it's kind of very much that kind of that world. And also, obviously, the daily news. If you're on the news at 6 o'clock, if you only produce the work at 10 past 6, that's too late. So it's very kind of short deadlines. So the idea of kind of running an organization, thinking much more about long-term strategy, was quite a learning curve. And the other thing, which is completely obvious now I'm sitting here now, but was a surprise to me when I first arrived, was just how much time I spend trying to raise money, because obviously it goes without saying, if you don't have money, you can't pay all the brilliant people you employ. And, this is a really tough time for charities, particularly in our sector. We work with kind of small fact-checking media organizations around the world. And what we don't take money directly from we don't take government money. A lot of them were dependent in one form or another on either directly USAID money or organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy in the US, and that money just disappeared overnight. So a lot of people working in some of the most difficult places in the world trying to promote independent media and good information are in serious difficulty. So it was notable. I went to a journalism festival about a month ago. When I'd been the previous year, all the conversation were about content and what are we doing? What's the innovation? This year, it felt like it was all about money and how are we going to survive. Yeah. So it's a difficult moment.
Yeah, I mean, what have you sort of had to learn, like trial by fire, almost in this first chief exec role? That came as a surprise, obviously the money stuff, but anything that you're sort of learnings you've had to pick up live that you didn't get from your sort of previous part of your career?
That's a good question. I think for me, one of the most important things is to be able to carry weight, but carry it lightly. Don't let anything become too heavy. Don't take setbacks too personally. Have the ability to wear responsibility lightly, I think, is a real skill. So I've seen quite a few people who you can see it's taking a bit of a toll, and we all need to look after ourselves as well as run organizations to the best of our ability.
Yeah, one sort of a nuance type question that I've got for you is, you've come from I can't ask this to the other guests on the show, but you've come from journalism. You're used to being in conversations and asking very hard questions, and I would assume like not being that bothered about how it lands because you want the answer. I just want you to answer my question. Whereas as soon as you're the chief exec and you've got the team and the well-being of the team and the organizational culture, was there you talked about running a bath and being a sort of one-man band kind of thing, and that really resonates with me. But I think I've had to learn about delivering conversations, potentially difficult conversations, in a different way than if I was just on my own asking somebody a hard question. So what are the learnings in terms of organizational culture have you had to learn? Or was there a difficult moment of, I'm a journalist, I'm not bothered about, I'm fierce and I'm going to ask my question, versus I need to deliver this in a careful, considered way because it's my team?
Yeah, it's a different form of communication. I mean, you do need to ask questions pretty directly and sometimes quite aggressively to get information in the first place. But then there's the delivery, which you're doing on air, which hopefully is in a slightly more measured way. So I think there's some experience of doing that. But yeah, you're dealing with, I suppose the thing which is the same in the end, you are dealing with people, no matter how, and the knowledge that everyone is different and everyone has different buttons that you can press, which are good and bad. And the kind of the almost instinctive way that you understand how to get the best out of somebody. And I think that again, in terms of a leadership thing, I'm very big on delegation. I want to delegate responsibility. I want to give people the confidence that I have their back and I want them to take responsibility for things. And I think for me, that's an important part of leadership, not just to take everything on yourself, but to allow others to flourish around you. The other thing I want to mention, actually, because I haven't mentioned it yet, is because we're talking. You mentioned AI, and I was going to go on to it, but then we kind of went down in a different direction. Is that while AI is a massive challenge, while technology has been the thing that has turbocharged misinformation over the last few years by making it so easy to spread, it's also got to be part of the solution. There's no way we can deal with bad information at the scale of the internet without using technology.
Final question. We live in sort of what can feel like dark times, the news cycle, all of this stuff, the things we've been talking about today. Give us some hope. Why should we be optimistic?
Because I think there are still enough people in our sector. There are still people who do crave good information, who want to be able to make decisions for themselves. And why do they want to make decisions for themselves based on good information? Because they care about their friends and family. And that is a feeling that spreads right through society. Okay. So I think we just have to have the courage to believe that people understand that accurate, trustworthy information is good for them.